Hello, friends. Welcome back to the While We're Waiting Hope After Child Loss podcast. I'm Jill Sullivan, your host and one of the co-founders of the While We're Waiting ministry. This is a podcast of stories of devastating loss and grief and heartbreak and struggle, and stories of hope and healing and faith and, yes, even joy. Underlying every conversation is the hope we have in Jesus Christ, which makes it possible to not just survive the loss of a child, but to live well while we're waiting to see them again in heaven one day. You can learn more about our ministry and the free bereaved parent retreats we host by visiting our website at www.whilewe'rewaiting.org. Now, welcome to episode number 252, which is the second half of my conversation with Brad and Karen Nadolson. In the last episode, we got to know their daughter Bethany, her vibrant heart, her passion for missions, and the strength she showed in her cancer journey. We also began to glimpse the depth of their grief and the faith that has carried them through. Today, we continue that conversation as Brad and Karen open up about life after loss, how grief has changed them, how they've learned to lean into Jesus in their sorrow, and what it looks like to keep living with purpose and hope. They offer wisdom for other grieving parents, reflections on faith, and how even now they're learning to see the good. Let's return to our conversation. What advice would you give to someone who might be listening, who is right at the very beginning of their grief journey, just in those first weeks or months? What advice would you have for them?
I just stayed at the foot of the cross as much as I could. I was in a situation where I could. I was watching my grandson, but they gave my daughter time off from work. I know not everyone is in that situation, but I just kind of by myself with Jesus and my thoughts with Bethany. And I let it all out. I just, cried and cried. It's got to come out. I know you need to face it and deal with it. And I went, strong from the beginning on dealing with the grief. I just sat in it. So I think it's really important to find that time. If someone has a schedule that doesn't allow them to have the time that I did, to make sure you're fighting it, that you just carve it out somehow, to spend as much time as you can with Jesus and let that out. And I think another thing is, like with Bethany, with the see the good, the thankfulness, when he tells us to be thankful, it's for our good. It's healing. So when we look at the things to be thankful for, like she did, that was healing for her. And so I think that, not that we're thankful that our child died, but looking for the things each day that God is blessing us with, and focusing on that, or bringing our attention to that. And then the last thing for me was a big one is it's hard. I didn't want to have fun anymore. I didn't want to enjoy anything because I thought, Bethany loved life, loved her friends, her family, and enjoying time. And so I didn't want to have that if she couldn't have it anymore. I did get to the point where God worked through that. And I saw the joy that he was bringing to my life with different things. Like my grandson, our third daughter, got married like 2.5 to 3 weeks after Bethany left.
Wow.
It was already planned. Bethany was supposed to be in the wedding. They wanted to get married. They totally changed everything. They canceled the big wedding. Just had this very simple, intimate ceremony in our daughter's backyard that Bethany loved, our oldest daughter's backyard. And it was a gift. That wedding, I could tell that God, it was so close to Bethany and that horrible sorrow that we were going through. But then he was also bringing the joy of two people coming together. But we were able to focus on the joyous occasion. And I always just call it like it was a holy moment. God just, it was very holy.
Yeah, no doubt.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a blessing.
Yeah.
Person who's like at the very beginning of their grief journey, Karen said about embracing it. You have to deal with it. You can't run. It will catch you. You might work through it a little bit differently than others, but you're going to have to deal with it, or else maybe it'll come out in a healthy way. But a couple things I would maybe recommend to somebody is to ahead of time, you're going to have to, kind of funny saying it this way, but you're going to have to extend grace to people because they don't get it. I didn't get it before I lost a child. And they're going to say dumb things to you. And they're going to say something like, oh, I know how you feel. I lost my grandpa. And you're going to look at them and go, you have no idea how I feel.
That's right.
But you can't really say that.
Right.
And my advice would be just to, when people express sympathy, but maybe they say it in a way that isn't really relatable, extend grace, receive it, and realize the heart that it's coming from, even though it might not, you're like, no, that's not right. And another thing I remember somebody asking me, and this would be advice to someone too. You might feel anger, and I did, still do at times. And people said, "Or are you angry with God?" And maybe this is maybe I'm not being honest with myself, but I've always told people, no, I'm not angry with God. I'm just angry that we live in a world like this, and it's really people and sin that I'm angry with. And the fact that there's a disease like called cancer, but I'm angry. But I also am reminded of, it's in John chapter 6, when the crowds were starting to leave Jesus, he turned to his disciples and said, "You don't want to leave too, do you?" And Simon Peter, answered him and said, "Lord, to whom shall we go? You have the words of eternal life. So we've come to believe and know that you're the Holy One of God. So where else will you turn?" And so my advice is, you have to turn to the Lord. You have to turn to Jesus, because where else will you turn? Do you turn to alcohol or drugs and addiction? That's not going to help. I mean, that's just going to make things worse in the long run. Are you going to turn to throwing yourself into a hobby or work? In the end, that's going to leave you empty. The only place that makes sense to turn is to Christ. And that's the only way we're going to get access to the words of eternal life, and so that would be my advice, is even if it doesn't make sense to you, that's what you have to do.
That's great advice. Thank you for that. I think that's very helpful. So have you found a response that works for you when people ask you, so how many children do you have?
It probably is easier for us than a family whose children are young, I think, because I guess we could run into that. I haven't yet.
I have.
But I definitely would say 4.
I say 4.
And then if they ask about them, I did have one gal I met, and it was actually connected with a young mom that's staying with us. And she asked about my kids, and she said, well, do they all live local?
Mm-hmm.
And I'm thinking, at that point, I thought, I'm never going to meet her again. So I said, yeah. So I just said, yeah, because, Bethany lives in my heart, so she's local, right? So she's still here to me. And that was she lived in my heart, but you know what I'm saying. She's still in my heart. But
sure.
I did end up later having to, because I did end up getting more connected with this woman. So I did end up saying, hey, I want to apologize for not really, but yeah, I would always say 4 for sure.
I had a student in my class that I was talking to just this week. It was on Tuesday. Somehow family came up, and I said I had all daughters. And he said, oh, how old are your daughters and what do they do? And so I said, I have 4. And then I just went through and said, my oldest daughter, she's married. Does this. My second daughter would have been, this year her age, but she's deceased. She left, and I just went right through them just like that. And when he heard me say number 2, he went, "Oh, I'm really so sorry," But I just decide to answer it directly, because I don't want to say 3, because that's not the way. I would never do that.
Never say 3.
No, never. So I say 4. That's my answer. And if people probe, I'll explain.
Yeah. And I think I like what you said, Karen, about, if it's somebody you're not going to be engaged with anymore, it turns out, I know you really did with this lady, but it's somebody that you're just meeting and you're never going to see that person again. You could say the number 4, but you don't have to go into the details. And so, yeah, I know that's a hard question. It was hard for me in that first year or two. Just hard.
It is.
I did have, when Bethany was little, I ran into him, and it was just a few months later after she left. And he asked me, he hadn't seen her since she was a little girl, and, probably like 5th grade or something. And he said, how's Bethany doing? And that was tough because
Yeah.
I felt bad for him because he didn't think that was going to fall out. I mean, I said, I'm sorry that I'm going to throw something heavy on you here, and I told them,
Yeah.
I had a similar experience. A guy that I knew and knew Bethany had cancer in the fall. I saw him and he said, "Hey, how's your daughter with cancer doing?" And so then I had, and then like, that was tough. But then I answered him and he goes, "Oh, I'm sorry I asked." I go, "Oh no, don't be sorry that you asked. I love to talk about her. I just,
Sure.
I'll be a little emotional talking about it, but I love talking about her."
I think because Bethany was such a private person, that her cancer journey was very private.
Yeah.
So what Bethany went through, people have no idea what she endured. Mm-hmm. We don't know a lot of it. Mm-hmm. Because and so we respected that. So we didn't tell people, and we weren't posting things on Facebook. Mm-hmm. So a lot of people weren't able to keep up, with it. And so those kind of things can happen.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So you've made it through your second set of holidays, major holidays, Thanksgiving, Christmas, New Year, since Bethany went to heaven. And pretty soon you're going to be approaching that 2-year mark of her homegoing. Have you managed to create any new traditions or special remembrances with your family on those special days?
Yeah, we definitely wanted it to look different. It was already going to shout that Bethany wasn't there. We didn't want it to the normal stuff that would really shout it. So we were actually blessed in the sense that usually our family has always been together. And then the first Thanksgiving after Bethany left, our oldest daughter ended up going to her in-laws that Christmas. It worked out with her work schedule. So that kind of helped. And the girls, they were all married at that time. So they were kind of divided. And we intentionally allowed that to happen so that it's just going to look nothing like it had before with Bethany. And then Christmas we knew was going to be tougher because it's a whole season. Bethany loved Christmas. And so we did get away as a family. I didn't want to put up Christmas decorations, but when I, got Bethany's things, she had a little place. She finally let us help her get a little place on her own. And so I found her Christmas tree and Christmas decorations. So I decided that I was going to put up her stuff. Mm-hmm. And then we did that again. And I probably will from now on. I'll just put the decorations that she had got. We put those up. And we did go away as a family.
We left town last 2 Christmases to do it different.
Mm-hmm. And do you feel like that was helpful for you?
Yes, very.
Yes, because it just looked very different. I mean, obviously, because, going away, especially the first year, I try to be really careful with my kids. I learned that when Bethany was diagnosed with cancer. I realized I needed to be careful. My youngest was still living here, and he doesn't like to talk about the hard stuff like that. And so I realized early in Bethany's cancer journey, I was talking too much to my 17-year-old daughter, and I knew that wasn't healthy for her. And I thought, none of my kids are guaranteed tomorrow. So I can't make this all sadness and heartache and focus on the sadness of Bethany. And I did learn that then. So I tried really hard at family gatherings. They all know that I will bring up Bethany. They know that, and they want to tell. But I'm really careful not to make it in a sense, depressing. So we honor her the way she'd want to be honored. Bethany would not want us to be, we're so sad, Bethany's not, she wouldn't want that. She would be like, "What are you doing?"
What are you doing, Mom?
Yeah. I love that you've kind of found that balance, especially with your surviving daughters, because that's really important. I know with us, of course, our surviving daughter is named Bethany. And with the holidays and things like that, we realized we just needed to prioritize her and make things special for her. And of course, we were sad that Hannah wasn't there, and we talked about Hannah, but we didn't want to make it all about Hannah.
Exactly. Yeah.
We want to celebrate the family that we still have. And sounds like you guys have been able to kind of find that balance. Yeah, that's good. Now, we know that husbands and wives grieve differently. What has been your experience with that?
Well, I and I still have to deal with this because I saw a lot of Bethany suffering, and that's probably my hardest thing still is that, nobody wants to see their child suffer. And people don't know, but Bethany went through very horrific things. And so he doesn't want to talk about that. And I know my girls, that's not healthy for them either. And so that
Right.
is why I talk to God about it, a lot. But I do still feel like I probably should maybe go to a counselor to get it all out. So we don't talk. He didn't like talking about her can't. It is different because I wanted to talk about it and he didn't because he just like doesn't want to go there with it. And then I'm a crier alone. And so I go away to mourn.
There's a word picture that I came to like maybe express, because I think sometimes Karen, she doesn't understand why I don't want to talk about it. And what I came to realize, and I said, one drowning person can't really help another drowning person. You potentially pull them down more or you weight them down. And that's like when she was expressing like that, her grief to me, it just overwhelmed me, because I felt then not just how bad I felt, but for how bad she's feeling, and so you really need someone who's not drowning to help you. You need somebody who's not drowning to throw you a line. That's how I kind of felt about it. And so for me, and this kind of fits my personality, it's more like, I thought about it, it's more like accessing a filing cabinet. Like I have to okay, I'm going to go pull this file out and face some of these things, but I can't have it constantly before me because then I'm just like constantly overwhelmed by it, And so, yet we had this, who was it? Was it Andrew? One of maybe our son-in-law or somebody came up, showed us this quote from C.S. Lewis' book, A Grief Observed, about
Mhm.
like his wife that really resonates with me and describes, I think, our family's experience. And we had it at her memorial service. And the quote is, he was talking about his wife, but it fit perfectly for us. Her absence is like the sky spread over everything. And I guess in the grieving differently, it's already spread over everything, so for me to dig in
Yes.
more was just like pushing me underneath the waves. And I think but I think for Karen, it's more, she needs to express it.
Well, I do need to get it out.
Yeah. And for me, I'm like,
I did understand that about him, and we've been married a long time, so I knew that. I knew it early on with her cancer that he didn't really want to talk about like what the doctors were saying, and so I really didn't try. After she left, I knew I couldn't. Also, because our daughter told us when she started going to a counselor right away after Bethany left, because she just felt like she was paralyzed. She did tell that the counselor said that. She says, your family cannot rely, because you guys are all going through the same grief in different ways. So you've got to find people on the outside to help you through that.
Well, it sounds like you have been able to communicate with each other about what you need and what you don't need and what works for you and what helps and what doesn't help. And I think that's a whole lot of it is just being willing to communicate with each other about that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah. Yeah. So that's good. So I think all of us that have lost a child have this very sharp dividing lines in our lives of the before and the after. Talk about the before Brad and Karen and now the after Brad and Karen.
Oh, so for me, it's completely spiritual. Because I spent so much time with Christ, at his feet. He was on my walks. I'm just with him, and I just felt like, even though I've been walking with the Lord since I was 18, I just felt like so much just kind of connected. Even though I felt like I was, seeking to, live for him and try to help other people. It's just, I don't know, just a deeper, because of that communion with him, that constant communion in the prayer. And, prayer, I think for a lot of people can be harder than spend time in the word, But I've realized when I really spend time praying to him, like on walks and stuff, I feel like it brings me closer, even just in his word. I just feel very, very close to him. So, and just some of the things that I realized, like, so, you think of the verse where I have come that they may have life and have it to the full. I've learned that there is a danger, I think, in America, in our church, because we do have so many things that can keep us from really being really close to God and dependent on Him. I met a gal I spent a summer with a girl that met Mother Teresa. And she told me when she was in India, when she met Mother Teresa, the gal I met, she told me that she looked around the people and was just heartbroken. And she said, these poor people. And she said, little Mother Teresa, who's very tiny, looked up at her and she said, and she knew she was from America. And she said, no, I feel bad for Americans because they're poor in spirit, because they don't see they have so much, they don't see their need for God. And so going through something like this, I mean, I totally needed God to make it through this. And so I understand that verse so differently than I think we get this idea in our culture. It's the abundant is we experience Him. We experience heaven here. And everything good about God in our lives is what He means by that. The abundant life is the fullness of Him in our lives. Mm-hmm. So that's huge for me. That just living the rest of my life very different. Not like, what do I feel like doing? Like, no, like, God, what do you want me to do today? Like, I really wanted to do this, but I know you want me to do this. I every day I'm like, walk in the spirit, not in flesh.
Yeah. And we have to remind ourselves of that daily, don't we?
Yeah.
Yeah, because it doesn't come naturally. Yeah. How about you, Brad?
Yeah, for me, I've grown in certainly more sensitive to people who've experienced child loss. I did not understand it. Now I do. And, I've known some people who've lost children and I didn't get it. And I almost feel like I need to apologize to them. Like, yeah, I had no idea what you're going through. I probably thought I did, but I didn't. And then I'm more sober minded. Fleeting things, like, let's say, interested in like being like basketball or sports or football. Yeah, I still enjoy those, but yeah, they're just games, and so those things are less important. People and family are more important than ever. With Bethany's diagnosis, and this kind of goes to the van thing a little bit, but one of my daughters reminded me that I had made this point to them a couple times, and I remember doing this with Bethany. Bethany would say, "Hey, Dad, do you want to go up to Kroger with me?" That's a grocery store, if you don't know what that is from. Okay. Or, "Hey, Dad, do you want to go to Target?" Or, "Hey, Dad, do you want to go to Home Depot?" My default answer became yes. I didn't care what she asked me to do. Even if I didn't want to do it, the answer was yes. "Dad, we want to go do this?" Yes. And then this is an after, thing. So then with my other daughters, they ask me to do something, even if I don't think, oh, that's something I really want to do right now. The answer is yes. I'm gonna. If you ask me to do something with you, I'm gonna go do it. And that's something that I've, to making sure that nothing keeps me distracted or busy from spending time with family, and others.
Yeah. And that's a really good thing to come out of an experience like this, that knowing the value of being with our loved ones and appreciating every moment we have with them.
Because as Karen said, you never know.
Right.
And so why, before I would have thought, oh, there's plenty of time to go do something. But after living through this, it's like, no, there may not be.
Yeah, that's a good thing. So what have you learned about God and His character through your journey with Bethany?
Well, I would say one of the things I've learned about God and His character and knowing God is that we saw this, with Jesus, says for the cross, it was the joy set before Him, yet He was in despair in the garden, he didn't want to go through it and said, "God, if there's another way," and so grief and sorrow can coexist with joy. They seem to be mutually exclusive, but they're not. Joy in knowing God is in control, even when things don't go the way we want, or we have incredible pain or loss. You think about Psalm 23, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death. Unless you've been there, you don't really understand what that means. I will fear no evil because, God is with us and he guides us and he comforts us and he provides. And so that's what I've learned about God. God's faithful even when we don't feel it, and realizing, and this is the thing of humility, we have a small and narrow view of the greater workings of God. So we want to characterize things as good or bad. But God says he's going to work all things for the good of those who love him and for his purposes. So even things that we think are bad, they are bad, but God works them somehow to good. And, and in the end, all of our hopes hinge on the truth of the resurrection. Easter's coming up, and all of our hopes hinge on that, and so that's another thing, I guess, that I knew this, but it's just been reinforced.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I was seeing the goodness of God because during this, I could see the joy that he was bringing into my life during this to help me get through it. And then I also with faithfulness, because it was, to me, I could just so sense that he was walking through this with me. And I could tell people were praying for me. It was just, I don't know how to explain it. Like it is a feeling. I don't know. It's like a weighted, like you can feel it. Or I don't know how to explain that, but it was not just, I felt God's, he was there with me. It was like, I just knew he was walking through this with me. And then his sovereignty, because this one was a tough one for me, because of the misdiagnosis.
Mm-hmm.
And that was really hard for me I had to, early on, I said, in my prayer time, I was like, God, I know that you saw all that. That was not an accident. Okay, it was failure on man's end, but you allowed it. And so you're sovereign over it. You saw it all unfold. And then just trusting that everything that Bethany went through, he saw and he allowed. And so just, first, trying to choose to trust that. And then as you choose, and each day seeking to choose, it actually becomes not just choice anymore. It's automatic that you trust it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's good. Thank you for that. Are there any particular scriptures that have been especially helpful to you on your grief journey?
I've been doing, this is my third year reading the Bible through in a year with this program. It's called Bible Recap. If anybody wants to search that, I really enjoy it. And I think that was been really good for me to see God through the Bible. A lot of times, and she even talks about this, the woman who does this, that a lot of times people see verses as, what is God saying to me? And this study is more of like, the word is about him. And so what are we learning about him? And that can apply to us, but the word is about him. And so that's been a gift to me, is reading it in that way, and just understanding the completion, the whole thing, and just seeing from the very beginning to the end, the redemption that he was pursuing his people to redeem his people. It's just the theme and just the comfort in seeing that. I think, and then so the verses for me are more because I saw in that me drawing close to God, that he was faithful, that when we draw close to him, James 4:8, if you draw close to God, he will draw near to you. And I experienced that. And then the Lord is close to the brokenhearted, is in Psalms 34:18. And then the choosing to trust him when there were times that everything went wrong for Bethany. There were so many things that went wrong. And there was one time I was at the hospital, we prayed, and I just felt like, God, I don't see you here in any of this. All the bad things that happened and that she had to endure. So I had to keep making a choice that you say in your word that you are. So I'm going to choose to trust you in that. And then walking in that faith in that becomes more automatic then. So in Hebrews 11:6, without faith, it is impossible to please him. And so seeking to choose. is so that I can please him. And because of that, growing in my faith, getting stronger in that. Isaiah 26:3, you keep him in perfect peace, whose mind is stayed on you because he trusts in you. So I've experienced that as well. Like I said, for me,
Yeah.
the main thing was just staying close to the cross through this.
Mm-hmm.
And I know I have one more, but I'm pretty positive Brad has the same one.
Oh, really?
So I'll let him share it. Well, because especially with Bethany's, what Bethany went through.
Oh,
Romans
it's
8:18.
well, it's a similar. It's not the same passage, but there's been several. Just summarizing them, like in Isaiah 53:3, which is a prophecy about the Savior. About the Messiah. He was described as a man of suffering, familiar with pain. And people say they want to be like Jesus. Well, then you need to be a person of suffering and familiar with pain. And we don't like to hear that part. And then, back to the Garden of Gethsemane, Jesus said to his disciples when he asked them to keep watch and watch with him, that he said, my soul is overwhelmed with sorrow to the point of death. And so Jesus gets us, he gets the fact that he knows what sorrow is and grief. And then he even asks, if there's another way, may this cup pass, but not as you will, or as I will, but as you will, so. And then there's another passage here that just kind of like blows me away. It's in 2 Corinthians 4. And I think about this. It's just hard to internalize it. But Paul had listed out all the things he had been through. And then he said, we don't lose heart. Though outwardly we are wasting away, yet inwardly we are being renewed. And he said and he calls them our light and momentary troubles. It's hard to view this as a light and momentary trouble. But he said, they are achieving for us an eternal glory that far outweighs them all. And so that's encouraging to me to know that God, in God's kingdom, in his glory, it's going to far outweigh anything we've gone through here. I'm excited to see what that looks like because it's hard for me to imagine.
Yes.
Yeah, it's very similar to that Romans 8:18 verse.
I don't know if have you seen The Chosen?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
So I was watching that, and just such a good show, so well done. Well, I've read the verse Jesus wept, but the portrayal of Jesus wept touched me in that.
Yeah. Yeah. I actually haven't gotten to that episode yet.
Oh,
But I'm there. I'm close.
Okay.
I haven't seen that one.
Well, that's okay. It's in the Bible. Jesus wept, right?
I know it's coming.
Because I a lot of times just think of Jesus wept but they portrayed it as he wept. He was brokenhearted.
Mm-hmm.
So that was, when I saw that was so comforting to view that he didn't just tears and sadness for us, but he was broken with us, broken with Bethany, when what she went through.
Yes. Yeah. That has actually become one of my favorite scriptures, just Jesus wept.
Yeah.
Because for a bereaved parent, that's everything we need to know.
Yeah. Right.
Is that compassion he has for us.
Mm-hmm.
I love it. So one last question I always like to ask. Has music been an important part of your grief journey? And if so, what is on your playlist?
Okay, I'll go first on this one because for me, it hasn't been in the sense of really active listening. And the reason is, it's kind of like the thing with Karen and talking about it. Some of the songs just really make me sad.
Yeah,
and so maybe I'm not quite there yet. And, we are kind of early. Maybe if you interviewed me 4 years from now, I might answer this differently. But there's a couple of songs that I think about the words. And one of them is, do you know the song, Blessed Be Your Name? Mm-hmm. And, we're all ready to say to God, blessed be your name, like in the lyrics where when the sun's shining down on me and it's all as it should be. But it's the next verse that's difficult for us, when it says, on the road marked with suffering, though there's pain in the offering, blessed be your name. And it kind of goes back to when, Bethany said to me about stage 3, would you say, praise God, if it was stage 4? And I said, no, I probably wouldn't have. But I should say, blessed be your name, even if it's pain and it's, marked with suffering. So that song, and then of course, kind of like maybe a classic song for people who are, Karen might mention that the song about Bethany, but that classic hymn, It Is Well With My Soul, because that actually song gives me perspective, because when I think about what that guy went through with losing his wife and was it 2 daughters, I think, then to be able to say peace, even when sorrows like sea billows roll, and God taught him to say, it's well with my soul. And I thought, wow, if that guy could say that, with everything he went through. And then he talks about, though Satan should buffet and trials should come, let this blessed assurance control, because of what Jesus did, is essentially his conclusion. Yeah. And so I think about those songs, but I still have trouble listening to them.
Yeah, I understand that.
Yeah.
That wasn't one of my songs that I wrote my songs down and I don't know where that paper is. But on that as well, for the longest time, I could not accept that saying when Bethany was diagnosed. And I talked to my mom about it. I want to trust God, but I can't come out and actually say it's well with my soul. And then I got to the point where I actually did an art craft it was a fundraiser with some friends. And one of the choices of the thing you could make was It Is Well With My Soul. And I did it. And it's in our family room. And then since Bethany knew she was dying and things were getting bad, she had put things in her phone. Her youngest sister was able to get them and find them, where we shared at the retreat that she wrote all of us goodbye letters, and then to like her extended family and stuff as a whole, like my side of the family, his side of the family, and then her friends. And something else that our daughter found was Bethany had asked for 3 things. She said, I don't want a traditional service. We knew that.
Knowing her.
Yeah. And she wanted us to do whatever we could to still continue making sure those kids in Haiti got to go to school. And the third is, she picked out the song, It Is Well With My Soul. Mm-hmm. And so there was a beautiful version that she picked for that. And then when we were at the retreat, in the room that we were in, the picture on our wall said, It Is Well With My Soul. Mm-hmm. So I thought when he brought that song up that share that. But so the music is hard for me too. And I think I've heard this in different podcasts. Like a lot of our music is very upbeat and, like joyful. And, they think that joy is being happy and bouncing around. And I'm like, no, I experience joy in a deep way. And it's different. It's different than that joy that's portrayed. And I'm not saying there's anything wrong with that, because King David, danced, and there's, times for that. But a lot of our songs I feel like are kind of more about us. And I just wanted songs that were worshiping him. And so I'm terrible at remembering names, and that's why I had to write it down. I know that it's Chris Tomlin, and it's a holy, I guess when I sing that, because I know one day we will join the angels and be singing. And so when I sing that, in my mind, we're all in a crowd with the angels singing. Do you know what the name of that song is? Holy. It's
off the top of my head, no.
The angels sing. Yeah. So anyway, but it's a great one. And then Gratitude by Brandon Lake. And then I like the song that CeCe Winan sings, Come Jesus Come. Mm-hmm. Yeah. It just, because that's where that speaks to me in volumes.
Yeah. Yeah. Music is hard, and it was hard for me for a long time. And you guys, again, you're not even quite 2 years into this. So I can see why that may be a struggle. That song, It Is Well. One mom that I talked to on the podcast, she said for a long time she couldn't sing that song. Mm-hmm. Yeah. But then she realized that really it wasn't well with her heart. Her heart was broken. Mm-hmm. But it was well with her soul because of what Jesus did for us on the cross. Yep. And that kind of changed my whole attitude about that song.
For sure. I'm glad you shared that with us.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. Well, we've been talking for quite a while, and it's time to wrap up. So is there anything else you'd like to share before we end our conversation?
I know that you probably don't want this to be a commercial for your ministry, but we do appreciate you, Brad, and the others I don't remember the names of like, I know you're like co-founders, but the others who lead the While We're Waiting ministry, just because grief is something that many people just suffer through in silence, with no support or help, or feeling there's people that even understand. And I know from us attending the retreat that we did, it was a unique experience in the fact that we were in a room where we didn't feel like, yeah, no one here understands. We felt like, yeah, everybody here understands. And not that I'm happy about that, but I know they understand. And so While We're Waiting gives people like that an opportunity to be supported by people who understand what they're experiencing in a Christ-centered ministry. And I think that's a great thing. So we appreciate you guys and what you're doing.
Thank you. We always say we're the ones that get the biggest blessing from While We're Waiting. And we do. We get to meet people like you and hear stories like Bethany's. So thank y'all for coming on and for being my guests and for sharing your story and your beautiful Bethany story. And I hope her and Hannah have met in heaven.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know how all that works, but we always talk about that at While We're Waiting. It just seems like something that God would do, as we're sitting here together talking about our kids, that somehow, he would bring them together as well. So we'll find out if that's true or not when we get to heaven, but it's a nice thought.
Right.
Yeah. Well, thank you all.
So, thank you all. Appreciate that.
Thanks, Jill.
Thank you so much for joining me for another episode of the While We're Waiting Hope After Child Loss podcast. If this podcast has been a blessing to you, please take just a moment to leave a rating or a review, and please feel free to share it with someone you know who might be helped by it. We're so grateful for all of you who come back and listen every week, and those of you who may be listening for the very first time. I hope God has used it to encourage you today and to help you live well while you're waiting.